During Sunday lunch, Dad boasted, "Your brother's building his own company. When will you grow up?" I just smiled. I already did, but I don't celebrate with people who never believed I would. His coffee cup froze in mid-air. Mom gasped. My brother Jake stopped chewing. The silence was worth 6 years of their doubt and dismissal. They had no idea what I built while they weren't watching. The Sunday lunch tradition at my parents' suburban home in Springfield had been going on for as long as I could remember. Every week, without fail, we'd gather around Mom's antique oak table, passing dishes of pot roast and mashed potatoes, while Dad dominated the conversation with his views on business, success, and, most painfully, how his sons measured up to his expectations. I'm Randolph Miller, 32 years old, and for most of my life, I've lived in the shadow of my older brother Jake. Dad built his construction company, Miller & Sons Construction, from nothing but a pickup truck and a toolbox. He expected both his sons to follow in his footsteps, but in different ways. Jake was groomed to be the face of the company, the charismatic leader who could charm clients and close deals. I was supposed to be the reliable workhorse, the one who would manage projects and keep things running smoothly. But 2 years ago, I walked away from it all. I quit my vice president position at Dad's company after a particularly heated argument about the direction the business was taking. Dad wanted to expand rapidly, taking on risky projects with questionable profit margins. I advocated for sustainable growth and exploring new building technologies. We reached an impasse, and I made the hardest decision of my life. "You're throwing away everything I built for you," Dad had shouted as I cleared out my desk. "What are you going to do? Start over at 30? You'll come crawling back within 6 months." I didn't come crawling back. Instead, I liquidated my savings and started researching sustainable building materials and techniques. I rented a small warehouse on the outskirts of town and began experimenting with eco-friendly construction methods that could revolutionize affordable housing. For 2 years, my family assumed I was finding myself, or worse, wasting my potential. They didn't know I'd been developing a revolutionary approach to modular housing that used recycled materials and reduced construction time by 60%. They didn't know I'd filed 4 patents, or that I'd been working 80-hour weeks building prototypes and refining my business model. They didn't know because they never asked. Our Sunday lunches became exercises in enduring Jake's success stories, and Dad's not-so-subtle jabs about my lack of direction. Mom would occasionally squeeze my hand under the table, her silent way of showing support she was too afraid to voice in front of Dad. Jake had indeed started his own company, breaking away from Dad's business to form Miller Next Gen Construction. Dad couldn't have been prouder, even though Jake's business model was essentially a carbon copy of Dad's with a sleeker website. So when Dad made his comment about growing up at lunch that day, something inside me finally snapped. 6 years of their doubt and dismissal crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. The stunned silence around the table was oddly satisfying. Dad recovered first, setting his coffee cup down with a deliberate clink. "What's that supposed to mean?" Before I could respond, my phone rang. I usually silenced it during family meals, but this time I was grateful for the interruption. I glanced at the screen and felt a surge of vindication. "I need to take this," I said, pushing back from the table. "It's Business Innovator magazine. They want to interview me about my company." I stepped into the hallway, aware of 3 pairs of eyes following me. I spoke loudly enough for them to hear as I confirmed the interview time with the journalist who was doing a feature on breakthrough technologies in the construction industry. When I returned to the table, Dad's expression had shifted from shock to skepticism. "What kind of scam are you mixed up in now? Business magazines don't just call regular people." "It's not a scam, Dad," I replied calmly. "Sustainable Solutions is a registered company with patents pending and a functioning prototype that's attracted attention from some serious investors." Jake snorted. "Sustainable Solutions? Sounds like a tree hugger charity, not a real business." Mom looked confused but hopeful. "Randolph, honey, why didn't you tell us about this?" I looked at each of them in turn, feeling oddly detached from the family dynamics that had defined me for so long. Because you never asked what I was working on. You all assumed I was failing. Dad's face reddened. Well, you can't blame us for thinking that. You've been secretive, working odd hours, not showing any signs of success. Not all success looks like Jake's, I replied. Not all success needs to be announced at every family gathering. I could see they didn't believe me. Not really. In their world, success meant flashy offices, company trucks with your name on the side, and constant networking at the country club. What I was building was too different, too innovative for them to understand without seeing it for themselves. You should come see what I'm working on, I offered, surprising myself with the invitation. All of you? Then maybe we can have a real conversation about growing up. The tension in the room was palpable, but something had shifted. The dynamic had changed, and for the first time in years, I wasn't the disappointment at the table. I was the mystery. 3 days after the Sunday lunch confrontation, I found myself at Riverside Grill, a upscale restaurant overlooking the river that divided our town. I hadn't planned on being there, but Mom had called the previous evening, her voice tinged with an unusual assertiveness. Jake is celebrating his new contract tomorrow night at Riverside. Your father and I think you should join us. It wasn't really a request, and part of me wanted to decline. But curiosity won out. How would they act around me now? Would they pretend our confrontation never happened? Or would they bombard me with questions about my business? The answer, it turned out, was neither. When I arrived at the restaurant, 15 minutes late, due to a call with a potential supplier, they were already seated at a corner table. Jake was in the middle of what appeared to be an animated story, his hands gesturing wildly as Dad leaned forward, completely engrossed. Mom was the only one who noticed my arrival, giving me a small wave. Sorry I'm late, I said, sliding into the empty chair. Work call ran long. Jake barely paused his story to acknowledge me with a nod before continuing. So anyway, as I was saying, this contract is going to put Miller Next Gen on the map. We're talking a 12-story office complex in the heart of downtown, right on Main and 5th. The Bellamy Group specifically requested us over 3 other established firms. Dad beamed with pride, clapping Jake on the shoulder. That's my boy. Always shooting for the stars. The waiter came to take my drink order, and when he left, Mom turned to me with a gentle smile. How's your project going, Randolph? The way she said project made it clear she wasn't sure what to call what I was doing. In her mind, it probably wasn't a real business yet. It's going well, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. We're finalizing the prototype for our first modular unit and meeting with the patent attorney tomorrow. Dad's attention shifted to me, his expression skeptical. Patents cost money. Where are you getting the funding for all this? It was a fair question, albeit delivered with his usual lack of tact. I've been bootstrapping until now, using my savings and some money from the stock options I cashed out when I left Miller & Sons. But we're moving into the next phase now. Jake interrupted before I could continue. Speaking of next phases, Dad, I wanted to run something by you about the Bellamy project. They're pushing for an aggressive timeline, and I'm thinking we might need to streamline some of the permitting processes. The way he emphasized streamline sent up immediate red flags in my mind. In the construction world, streamlining often meant cutting corners or calling in favors to bypass proper channels. Dad seemed to pick up on it too, but rather than look concerned, he leaned closer to Jake, lowering his voice. You know Ted down at the building department owes me a few favors. Maybe we should grab a drink with him next week. I couldn't help myself. Are you talking about skipping safety inspections? Jake shot me an annoyed glance. Not skipping. Just expediting. It's standard practice for projects on this timeline. It's dangerous and illegal, I countered. One oversight could cost lives. Dad's expression hardened. This is exactly why you couldn't hack it in the real construction world, Randolph. Sometimes, You need to be flexible to get things done. Not everything can be done by the book if you want to succeed. I was about to argue when a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit approached our table. He was in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, and the confident demeanor of someone used to being in charge. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you Randolph Miller?" I stood up, recognizing him immediately from his profile pictures online. "Mr. Daniels." What a surprise. "I wasn't expecting to see you until our meeting next week." Thomas Daniels was the founder of Greenfield Investments, a venture capital firm that specialized in sustainable technologies. His associate had reached out to me after seeing a presentation I'd given at a small industry conference. "I was having dinner with clients and spotted you across the room," he explained, extending his hand. "I hope you don't mind the interruption, but I was just telling my associates about your modular housing concept. The efficiency metrics you shared are impressive." I shook his hand, acutely aware of my family's stares. "Thank you. We're still refining the process, but initial tests are promising." Daniels nodded, his expression earnest. "The potential impact on affordable housing markets alone makes this worth exploring. My team is very interested in continuing our conversation. Are you still available for our meeting Tuesday?" "Absolutely," I confirmed. "I'll have the full presentation ready, along with the latest prototype renderings." "Excellent." He handed me his business card. I took the liberty of inviting Sarah Chen from Urban Development Partners as well. They're looking for innovative solutions for their Detroit revitalization project. After Daniels left, I returned to my seat, feeling a mixture of pride and awkwardness. The table was silent until Jake finally spoke. "Who was that?" His tone was skeptical, almost accusatory. "Thomas Daniels from Greenfield Investments," I replied. "They're interested in funding Sustainable Solutions' first manufacturing facility." Dad scoffed. "Venture capital? Those sharks will take your idea and leave you with nothing." "Not all investors are predators, Dad," I said. "Some actually believe in supporting innovation that can make a difference." Mom looked confused. "What exactly does your company do, Randolph?" "You've never really explained it." It was the first genuine question any of them had asked about my work. I took a breath, trying to explain it in terms they would understand. "We've developed a construction system using recycled and sustainable materials that can be assembled into housing units in a fraction of the time traditional building takes. The units are energy efficient, durable, and cost about 40% less than conventional construction." Jake rolled his eyes. "Sounds like glorified trailer homes." "They're nothing like trailers," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Our prototype has passed all the same building codes and safety standards as traditional construction. The difference is in the materials and assembly process." Dad still looked unconvinced. "And people are actually interested in this?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Especially affordable housing developers, disaster relief organizations, and urban renewal projects. There's a housing crisis in this country, and traditional construction methods can't solve it fast enough or affordably enough." Mom reached across the table and patted my hand. "It sounds wonderful, honey. I always knew you were the thoughtful one." Dad and Jake exchanged a look that clearly communicated their shared skepticism. They thought I was being conned, or worse, that I was exaggerating my company's potential to save face. "Time will tell, I suppose," Dad said dismissively, before turning back to Jake. "Now, about that Bellamy contract. Have you considered using the prefab supports we used on the Westfield project? Could save you a bundle on labor." Just like that, I was relegated to the sidelines again. But something had changed inside me. Their doubt no longer stung the way it once had. I had something real, something with potential to make a genuine difference. And for the first time, I had someone outside my family recognizing that potential. As Jake and Dad delved back into construction talk, I noticed Mom watching me with curious eyes. There was something new there, a question forming that she wasn't ready to ask. Maybe, just maybe, One member of my family was starting to see me differently. The following Tuesday marked a turning point. The meeting with Thomas Daniels and Sarah Chen went better than I could have hoped. They were impressed with the prototype, the business model, and most importantly, the potential social impact of sustainable solutions. By the end of the meeting, we were discussing specific investment terms and development timelines. I was riding this high when I walked into The Grind, a local coffee shop where I often worked when I needed a change of scenery from my warehouse office. I ordered my usual Americano and found a quiet corner table to review the draft investment proposal Daniels had sent over. I was so absorbed in the document that I almost didn't notice when someone stopped beside my table. Randolph Miller. I looked up to see a face I hadn't seen in almost a decade. Tyler? Tyler Adams? Tyler had been my roommate at State University, where we'd both studied architectural engineering. We'd been close friends throughout college, staying up late debating design philosophies and sketching ambitious concepts for sustainable urban development. After graduation, he'd taken a job with a prestigious firm in Seattle, and we'd gradually lost touch. Man, it's been forever. Tyler pulled up a chair without waiting for an invitation. He looked good, confident, in a casual but clearly expensive button-up shirt. His formerly wild curly hair, now neatly trimmed. I heard you were still in town, but I figured you'd be running your dad's company by now. I laughed. Not exactly. I left the family business a couple years ago. Tyler raised an eyebrow. Really? That's surprising. You were always the dutiful son in college. Things change, I said. What brings you back to Springfield? Last I heard, you were designing eco-friendly skyscrapers in Seattle. I was. He nodded. But I'm in a transition phase. The firm I was with got acquired, and the new management had a different vision. I'm exploring options, maybe thinking about striking out on my own. As we caught up, I found myself sharing details about sustainable solutions, excited to talk shop with someone who understood the technical aspects of what I was trying to accomplish. Tyler asked insightful questions, his eyes lighting up as I described the modular construction system. This is exactly the kind of project I've been looking for, he said when I finished explaining. Something with real purpose, not just another luxury condo building. Are you serious about looking for new opportunities? I asked, an idea forming. Tyler nodded emphatically. Absolutely. Seattle was great for my resume, but I'm ready for something more meaningful. I could use someone with your background, I admitted, especially with the investment round coming together. I've been handling everything myself. But if we're going to scale, I'd love to see what you're working on, Tyler said, leaning forward eagerly. We made plans to meet at my warehouse the next day. For the first time since starting this venture, I felt a spark of excitement about bringing someone else into my vision. Tyler had always shared my passion for sustainable design, and his experience with a major firm would bring credibility and expertise that would be invaluable as we scaled. The next morning, I arrived at the warehouse early to prepare for Tyler's visit. As I was organizing the prototype materials, my phone rang. It was my mother. Randolph, honey, she began, her voice tight with worry. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. What's wrong, Mom? She hesitated. Your father wants to talk to you about investing in Jake's company. The Bellamy project is bigger than Jake anticipated, and they're having some cash flow issues. I felt a knot form in my stomach. What kind of issues? I don't know all the details, she said. But your father took out a second mortgage on the house to help with initial costs, and now they need more. He's going to ask if you can loan them some money from your whatever investment you mentioned at dinner. The audacity was almost impressive. After years of dismissing my work, they now wanted to use my success to bail out Jake's mismanagement. Mom, that's not how investment funding works. That money isn't mine to loan out. It's designated for specific business development. She sighed. I told your father as much, but you know how he gets. Jake's been staying at the house the past few nights. He and his wife Lucy had some kind of argument, and he's been in a terrible mood. Your father's worried about him. Before I could respond, I heard the warehouse door open. Tyler had arrived. Mom, I have to go. I have a meeting. But tell Dad I can't loan them money. It's not personal. It's just not possible. I ended the call and greeted Tyler, pushing the family drama from my mind as I showed him around the facility. His enthusiasm was contagious as we examined the prototype modules and discussed potential refinements. This is incredible, Randolph, he said as I walked him through the assembly process. But you know what this reminds me of? I froze, suddenly uncomfortable with the direction of his comment. That project we designed for Professor Jenkins' Sustainability Studio senior year. The modular housing units with the interlocking support system. This uses the same basic concept. I swallowed hard. There are similarities, sure. But that was just a class project. This is a fully developed, practical application with proprietary materials and assembly methods. Tyler nodded, but his expression had changed subtly. Right, of course. It's just interesting to see how ideas evolve, you know? The uncomfortable moment passed as we delved into the business aspects of sustainable solutions. By the end of the visit, Tyler was clearly interested in joining the company. And I was excited about the possibility of having a partner who understood both the technical and social mission of what I was building. As we were wrapping up, Tyler picked up a binder from my desk, flipping through it casually. What's this? I glanced over. Just some old notes and sketches from the early planning stages. He stopped at a page containing a detailed diagram. This looks familiar too. I took the binder from him, closing it firmly. Like I said, ideas evolve. I drew on a lot of concepts we discussed in school. Tyler gave me a long look, then nodded. Sure, man. We all build on the past. No one's truly original, right? After Tyler left, I sat at my desk, an uneasy feeling settling over me. The conversation had stirred up memories of our college days, particularly our final project. Tyler and I, along with 2 other classmates, had developed a conceptual design for affordable modular housing. It had won the department's Innovation Award that year. While my current system was significantly different and more advanced, the seed of the idea had indeed come from that project. But what bothered me was that I'd taken that seed and nurtured it into something real, while Tyler had gone on to design luxury buildings that contradicted everything we'd once believed in. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. Need to talk about a business opportunity. Family dinner, tomorrow night. 7 p.m. I sighed, knowing exactly what opportunity he wanted to discuss. As I was contemplating how to respond, an email notification appeared. It was from a contact at the city planning department, someone I'd been working with to ensure our housing modules would meet all local building codes. The subject line made my blood run cold. For your information, Bellamy project concerns. I opened it to find a forwarded email chain discussing potential safety issues with the preliminary plans submitted for Jake's downtown office complex. The city engineer had flagged several areas where the plans appeared to cut corners on structural support requirements. At the bottom was a personal note from my contact. Thought you should know, given your family connection. This doesn't look good, Randolph. Multiple red flags that would normally trigger a complete review. I sat back in my chair, the pieces clicking into place. Jake's cash flow issues suddenly made sense. He was trying to build a 12-story building on a foundation designed for something smaller, using substandard materials to make up the budget difference. And now my father wanted me to invest in this disaster waiting to happen. As this realization sank in, another email arrived. This one from Thomas Daniels, confirming that the investment committee had approved our funding request, with one condition: a thorough review of all intellectual property claims to ensure there were no potential ownership disputes. Suddenly, Tyler's comments about our college project took on a more ominous tone. After 10 years, was it coincidence that he'd reappeared Just as Sustainable Solutions was on the verge of significant funding, I pulled out my old college portfolio, stored in a filing cabinet in the corner of my office. Flipping through the pages, I found our senior project. The basic concept was there, certainly, but what I'd developed with Sustainable Solutions had evolved far beyond those early sketches. Still, the timing of Tyler's reappearance and his pointed comments left me uneasy. I made a mental note to be careful about what information I shared with him until I better understood his intentions. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Tyler. "Great meeting today. Been thinking about your system. Have some ideas for improvements. Dinner tomorrow to discuss partnership possibilities?" I stared at the message, conflicting emotions washing over me. On one hand, I could use Tyler's expertise and another set of hands as the business grew. On the other, his sudden interest in my company right as it was gaining traction seemed suspicious. Before I could decide how to respond, a final email arrived that evening that changed everything. It was from a former colleague at Miller & Sons Construction, someone who'd always been friendly to me despite my father's obvious favoritism toward Jake. "You should see this," was all the message said, with a PDF attachment. I opened it to find a business plan. Not just any business plan, but one that looked eerily familiar. It was dated 3 years ago, right before Jake left to start his own company. As I read through it, my hands began to shake. The business model, the growth strategy, even some of the specific language was taken directly from a plan I'd drafted during my final year at Miller & Sons, a proposal my father had dismissed as too conservative. Jake hadn't just started a carbon copy of Dad's business. He'd stolen my vision for modernizing it, stripped out all the sustainability elements, and presented it as his own innovative approach. The betrayal cut deep. While I'd been working to build something new and meaningful, my brother had been passing off my ideas as his own, winning my father's approval with my work. I forwarded the business plan to my personal email, then sat in the darkening warehouse, trying to process what I'd discovered. 2 people I'd trusted, my brother and potentially my former best friend, had both betrayed that trust. Tomorrow would bring 2 difficult conversations, one with my family about Jake's dangerous corner cutting and theft of my business plan, and another with Tyler about his sudden reappearance and interest in my intellectual property. For the first time since striking out on my own, I felt truly alone in my journey. But I also felt a steely determination taking root. I wouldn't let anyone steal what I'd built. Not my brother, not my former friend, not anyone. The next evening arrived with a sense of inevitability. I'd spent the day securing my intellectual property, making copies of critical documents, and preparing for what would likely be an explosive family dinner. I'd also done some research on Tyler, discovering through mutual connections that he'd been fired from his Seattle firm for attempting to claim credit for a colleague's design. I arrived at my parents' house exactly at 7. A bottle of wine in hand, more as a prop than a gift. Mom answered the door, her smile strained. "They're in the living room," she whispered, taking the wine. "Your father's in one of his moods." I could hear voices as I approached. Jake's rising above the others. "It's just a temporary setback," he was saying. "Every major project has challenges. That's why we need to move quickly with the additional investment." I stepped into the room to find Jake pacing, while Dad sat in his favorite armchair, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen him. A woman I didn't recognize sat on the sofa, smartly dressed in a business suit despite the informal setting. "Ah, here he is," Dad said, noticing me. "Randolph, this is Patricia Lawson. She's Jake's business partner and financial advisor." The woman stood and offered her hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Randolph. I've heard a lot about you." Her grip was firm, her smile practiced. I immediately distrusted her. "Have you?" I replied. "That's surprising since my family rarely discusses me." An uncomfortable silence followed, until Mom announced that dinner was ready. As we moved to the dining room, I noticed Jake and Patricia exchanging glances, communicating silently in a way that heightened my suspicions. We were barely seated before Dad launched into his pitch. Randolph, I'll get right to the point. Jake's company is expanding rapidly, and with the Bellamy project, they need additional capital to cover expenses until the next payment installment. I took a sip of water. And you want me to provide this capital? We know you've come into some investment money for your project. Dad continued. We're proposing a short-term loan with favorable interest. It would be a good business move for you, and it would help your brother through a temporary cash crunch. Patricia jumped in. We're prepared to offer 12% interest over 6 months, significantly better than any bank would offer. 12% for 6 months is actually predatory lending, I noted. But that's beside the point. The answer is no. Jake's face darkened. You haven't even heard the full proposal. I don't need to, I replied. I've seen the concerns the city engineer raised about your Bellamy plans. The shock on their faces confirmed my suspicions. Jake recovered first, his expression morphing from surprise to anger. You've been spying on my business? I didn't need to spy. Your corner cutting has become common knowledge in the industry. You're using inadequate foundations and substandard materials to save costs, putting lives at risk. Dad interjected. That's a serious accusation, Randolph. Jake is a professional builder. Is he? I countered. Because professionals don't ignore basic safety standards, and they don't steal other people's business plans either. The room went silent. Mom looked confused, while Dad's expression was unreadable. Jake's face had drained of color. What are you talking about? Patricia asked, her practiced composure slipping. I pulled out my phone and opened my email. I received an interesting document yesterday. Jake's original business plan for Miller Next Gen Construction. Funny thing is, I wrote it 3 years ago, before I left Dad's company. Dad turned to Jake. Is this true? Jake's laugh was forced. He's making things up because he's jealous of my success. Always has been. I turned my phone toward Dad, displaying the document. The plan has my digital signature in the metadata. You can verify it yourself. Dad took the phone, scrolling through the document with increasing discomfort. When he looked up, the disappointment in his eyes was directed at Jake, not me, for perhaps the first time in our lives. You told me you developed this approach yourself, Dad said, his voice quiet. Jake's response was desperate. I did. I mean, I was inspired by some of Randolph's ideas. But I developed it into something workable, by removing all the safety protocols and sustainability measures, I added. Mom, who had been silent until now, spoke up. I don't understand what's happening. Jake, did you really take your brother's work? Before Jake could answer, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number I didn't recognize. I was about to silence it when I saw the area code was from downtown Springfield. Excuse me, I need to take this, I said, stepping into the hallway. The call was from a reporter at the Springfield Tribune, asking for comment on a building inspection that had just been conducted at one of Jake's recently completed projects, a 6-story apartment building on the north side. Several critical safety violations had been found, and the building was being evacuated pending emergency repairs. When I returned to the dining room, all eyes turned to me. Jake, you might want to check your messages. The north side apartments are being evacuated due to safety violations. Jake's face went pale. He grabbed his phone and stepped out of the room. We could hear his voice rising in the hallway. Patricia stood. I should assist with this situation. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, thank you for dinner. She nodded curtly to me, before following Jake. Left alone with my parents, I waited for them to process what had just happened. How serious is this, Randolph? Dad finally asked, his voice hollow. Very, I replied honestly. If the violations are as bad as I suspect, Jake could face criminal charges for knowingly endangering residents. And the Bellamy project will certainly be canceled. Mom began to cry softly. How could this happen? He's always been so successful. Success built on shortcuts isn't real success, Mom, I said gently. Jake took the easy path, using my ideas without the safety measures I included, cutting corners to maximize profit. Dad looked broken, the confident patriarch suddenly uncertain. I encouraged him. All these years, I pushed him to grow faster, take on bigger projects, outdo the competition. You pushed both of us, I corrected him. The difference is, I refused to compromise on safety and sustainability. That's why I left. The moment was interrupted by Jake storming back into the dining room, his face contorted with rage. "You did this," he shouted, pointing at me. "You called in the inspectors, didn't you? You've been sabotaging me because you're jealous." I remained calm. "I didn't call anyone, Jake. Your shortcuts caught up with you, as they inevitably would." "Liar," he spat. "You've always been jealous that Dad chose me to carry on the family business legacy. You couldn't stand that I was more successful than you with your ridiculous eco-friendly pipe dreams." Dad stood up slowly. "That's enough, Jake. You're taking his side now?" Jake's voice rose in disbelief. "After everything I've accomplished? After I built a company that made you proud? A company built on lies and dangerous shortcuts," Dad replied, his voice steady. "That's not the legacy I wanted." Jake's face twisted with rage. "This is all your fault," he said, turning to me again. "You turned them against me. You ruined everything." With that, he stormed out, the front door slamming behind him. Patricia followed moments later, offering no goodbye. In the silence that followed, I felt no satisfaction, only a profound sadness for what our family had become. My father sat heavily in his chair, suddenly looking his age. "I've made terrible mistakes," he admitted. "With both of you." Mom reached for his hand. "We both have, Frank. I wasn't ready to offer absolution, not yet." "I need to go," I said, standing. "There's something I need to take care of." Dad looked up. "Randolph, I'd like to see your company sometime. See what you've built." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was a start. "I'll arrange it," I promised. As I drove away from my childhood home, I called Tyler. We needed to have a conversation about intellectual property and trust, and it couldn't wait. The foundation of sustainable solutions was about to be tested in more ways than one. The following week unfolded like a slow-motion disaster. Springfield's local news was dominated by the story of Miller Next-Gen Construction's safety violations and the evacuation of the North Side apartments. As more buildings were inspected, more problems emerged. 3 more properties were found to have serious structural issues, and the Bellamy Group publicly canceled their contract with Jake's company. My conversation with Tyler had gone about as expected. When confronted with his pattern of taking credit for others' work, he'd initially denied everything, then attempted to justify his actions as industry-standard practice. When I made it clear I wouldn't be offering him a position at Sustainable Solutions, he'd grown hostile, threatening to claim that my technology was based on our shared college work. Fortunately, I documented my development process meticulously over the years, and a quick consultation with my attorney confirmed that Tyler had no legal claim to my intellectual property. Still, the experience left me shaken and more cautious about who I trusted with my vision. The investment from Greenfield proceeded as planned, with Thomas Daniels becoming something of a mentor as we prepared to scale production. We'd secured a larger facility and were in the process of hiring our first employees when I received an unexpected call from my mother. "Your father's in the hospital," she said, her voice trembling. "He had a heart attack this morning." I rushed to Springfield General Hospital, finding Mom in the cardiac care waiting room, her hands clutching a crumpled tissue. "How is he?" I asked, sitting beside her. "Stable for now," she replied. "The doctor said it was moderate, not severe, but at his age." She trailed off, dabbing at her eyes. "What happened?" Mom sighed heavily. "He was meeting with the bank about the second mortgage. With Jake's company collapsing, The loans are being called in. He started feeling chest pains during the meeting. The weight of the situation settled on me. My father's health, my parents' home, my brother's failed business, all interconnected in a web of consequences. "Have you heard from Jake?" I asked. Mom shook her head. "Not since he stormed out of dinner last week. Patricia called once to ask about some company documents, but nothing from Jake directly." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Your father's been asking for both of you. He says he needs to make things right." A nurse appeared at the waiting room door. "Mrs. Miller? Your husband is awake and asking for visitors." Mom stood. "Randolph, come with me, please." Dad looked small in the hospital bed, diminished by the medical equipment surrounding him. His eyes lit up when he saw us, though his smile was weak. "My family," he said softly. "Come closer." We stood on either side of the bed, Mom holding one of his hands while I hesitantly took the other. His skin felt papery and cool. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Dad began. "Even before this," he gestured at the hospital room. "I built my life around the wrong values, pushed my sons toward the wrong goals. Frank, you don't need to do this now," Mom said gently. "You need to rest." He shook his head stubbornly. "No. This can't wait. Randolph." He turned to me. "I owe you an apology. Many apologies. I didn't see the value in what you were trying to do because it didn't fit my narrow definition of success. I was wrong. The words I'd waited years to hear felt hollow in this setting, with my father weakened by illness and facing financial ruin. But I recognized the courage it took him to say them. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot. There's more," he continued. "The house, our retirement. It's all tied up in Jake's company. When the lawsuits start coming in," he trailed off, his expression bleak. "We'll figure something out," Mom assured him, though her voice lacked conviction. I found myself speaking without having fully thought through the implications. "I'll help, whatever you need." Dad's eyes filled with tears. "After everything, you'd do that for us?" "You're my family," I said, despite everything. A commotion in the hallway interrupted the moment. Raised voices approached, and suddenly Jake burst into the room, looking disheveled and frantic. "Dad!" he exclaimed, then stopped short when he saw me. "What's he doing here?" "Jake," Mom said sternly. "Your father had a heart attack. Both his sons should be here." Jake's gaze darted between us, his expression a mix of concern and suspicion. "Is he going to be okay?" "The doctors think so," I answered when Dad seemed too emotional to speak. With proper care and reduced stress, Jake nodded, then turned to Dad. "I'm sorry about all this. The company, the loans. I was trying to make you proud." Dad squeezed Mom's hand. "I know, son, but pride isn't worth this price." Jake looked lost, younger somehow. For a moment, I saw him as the little brother who used to follow me around our father's construction sites, asking endless questions and mimicking everything I did. "The bank is foreclosing on the house," Jake admitted. "And there are lawsuits coming from the tenants of the North Side apartments. Patricia's already left town." "Left town?" Mom repeated. "What do you mean?" Jake laughed bitterly. "She cleared out our business accounts yesterday, said she was going to seek other opportunities, and that I should prepare for the consequences. I trusted her with everything. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Jake had betrayed my trust, only to be betrayed in turn. "What are you going to do?" I asked. Jake shrugged helplessly. "What can I do? The company's finished. My reputation's ruined. I might face criminal charges for the safety violations." Dad stirred in the bed. "We'll face this as a family," he said firmly. "All of us," the nurse returned, informing us that visiting hours were ending and Dad needed to rest. As we prepared to leave, Dad held onto my hand. "Randolph, I want to see what you've built." When I get out of here, I want to understand the work you're doing. I'd like that, I replied sincerely. In the hospital parking lot, an awkward silence fell between Jake and me. Despite everything, I couldn't help feeling a twinge of sympathy for my brother. He'd made terrible choices, but he was also a product of our father's flawed values and expectations. What happens now? Jake finally asked. I don't know exactly, I admitted, but I meant what I said in there. I'll help Mom and Dad. They shouldn't lose their home because of this. Jake looked at me with genuine confusion. Why would you do that? After everything that's happened, I considered the question carefully. Because holding on to anger and resentment doesn't build anything, and I'm in the business of building things that last. He nodded slowly. I really messed up, didn't I? Yes, I agreed. But that doesn't have to be the end of your story. As I drove home that night, I realized that the crisis with my family had clarified something important about sustainable solutions. It wasn't just about creating innovative housing. It was about building a foundation for people to recover, rebuild, and grow. My family's situation was a microcosm of what I hoped my company could address on a larger scale, providing second chances and stable foundations for those who needed them. The next morning, I called Thomas Daniels with an expanded vision for our first major project. Instead of focusing solely on urban development, I wanted to create a pilot program for rehabilitating existing structures, making them safer and more sustainable without displacing residents. It's ambitious, Daniels acknowledged, but I think it aligns perfectly with our investment goals. Let's develop this further. As we discussed the details, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The family drama that had consumed so much of my emotional energy for years was transforming into fuel for my vision. The pain and betrayal were becoming stepping stones rather than obstacles. Later that day, I visited Dad in the hospital again, bringing preliminary sketches of the rehabilitation project. As I explained the concept, his eyes lit up with genuine interest. This could work for the North Side building, he said thoughtfully. If the basic structure is sound, your modular approach could fix the safety issues while improving energy efficiency. That's exactly what I was thinking. I agreed, surprised by his insight. For the first time in my adult life, my father and I were speaking the same language, finding common ground in the work itself, rather than arguing about our different approaches to it. You know, Dad said after studying the drawings for a while, I always thought sustainable meant impractical. But this is smart building. It's the future, coming from my father, the traditional builder who had resisted innovation throughout his career. It was perhaps the highest compliment he could offer. As I was leaving, Mom walked me to my car. Something's changed in him, she observed. In all of us, really. Near-death experiences have a way of shifting perspectives, I replied. She shook her head. It's more than that. Seeing what you've built, what you stand for, it's made him reevaluate everything he thought he knew about success. I hugged her goodbye, feeling a bittersweet mixture of vindication and regret. How many years had we lost to misunderstanding and pride? How much further along could sustainable solutions be if I'd had my family's support from the beginning? But those thoughts weren't productive. The path forward was clear now. Integrating my family's construction experience with my innovative approach to create something neither of us could have built alone. That evening, I received an unexpected email from the Bellamy Group, the developers who had canceled their contract with Jake's company. They'd heard about sustainable solutions through industry channels and were interested in discussing alternative approaches to their downtown project. As I prepared a response, my phone rang. It was Jake. I heard the Bellamy Group contacted you, he said without preamble. How did you hear that? I asked, surprised. Springfield's construction community is small, he replied. Word travels fast. I waited for the accusation, the claim that I was stealing his clients. But it didn't come. Instead, Jake said, I think you should take the meeting. You do? His sigh was audible through the phone. They deserve a good builder who won't cut corners. That's you. Not me. I see that now. The admission clearly cost him, and I recognized it for the olive branch it was. Thanks, Jake. That means a lot. Don't thank me, he replied. Just don't make my mistakes. Build something that actually matters. After we hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time, thinking about legacy and redemption, about the foundations we build our lives upon, and how easily they can crumble when constructed without integrity. The crisis wasn't over. My family still faced significant financial and legal challenges. Jake would have to answer for his negligence. My parents might still lose their home, but something fundamental had shifted in our relationships. Truth had finally broken through the facade of success we'd been maintaining for years. And in that truth, painful as it was, lay the possibility of building something authentic and enduring, both in my business and in my family. 2 months later, on a bright September morning, I stood with my father outside the Northside Apartments, now renamed Northside Commons. The building had been completely renovated using Sustainable Solutions' modular approach, transforming a dangerous structure into a model of safe, efficient, affordable housing. Dad walked slowly, still recovering from his heart attack, but his eyes were sharp as he examined the exterior upgrades. The insulation system is brilliant, he commented, running his hand along one of the panels. And you did all this without displacing the residents? I nodded, pride swelling in my chest. We worked in sections, moving families temporarily to vacant units while their apartments were renovated. No one had to leave the building, and no one saw their rent increase. And the Bellamy Group funded this as community restitution? Their investment covered about 60%, I explained. Greenfield and Urban Development Partners covered the rest as a demonstration project. We're documenting everything for case studies. Dad shook his head in amazement. In my day, fixing a mistake like this would have meant tearing everything down and starting over. This is revolutionary. Coming from my father, this was high praise indeed. In the weeks since his heart attack, we'd been slowly rebuilding our relationship, finding common ground in the technical aspects of construction, while carefully navigating the emotional terrain of our past conflicts. Want to see inside? I offered. As we toured the building, greeting residents who now knew me by name, I brought Dad up to speed on the other developments of the past 2 months. Sustainable Solutions had grown from a one-person operation to a team of 15, with projects planned in 3 states. The Bellamy Group had indeed hired us to redesign their downtown office complex, this time with sustainability and safety as primary considerations rather than afterthoughts. Most significantly, we'd established a training program for construction workers interested in learning sustainable building techniques, with Jake as our first student. How's he doing? Dad asked as we rode the elevator back down to the lobby. Better than expected, I admitted. He's genuinely talented when he's not cutting corners. And the community service hours he needs to complete as part of his plea deal fit perfectly with our training program. Jake had faced the consequences of his actions, accepting a plea agreement that included financial penalties, community service, and professional probation. It was a significant fall from grace, but he'd handled it with more dignity than I'd expected, acknowledging his mistakes and working to make amends. And Mom? I asked. How's she adjusting to the new place? My parents had been forced to sell their house to cover the financial fallout from Jake's company, moving into a modest condominium closer to the city center. It was a difficult transition after 30 years in the family home, but they were adapting. She's making it home, Dad replied with a small smile. You know your mother, always finding the silver lining. She says the smaller space is easier to clean, and she loves being able to walk to the farmer's market. We exited the building and stood for a moment in the autumn sunshine, an easier silence between us than would have been possible just months ago. I have something to discuss with you, I said finally. A business proposition. Dad raised an eyebrow. For me? For both of you, actually. Mom, too. I took a deep breath. I'm establishing a foundation associated with sustainable solutions, focused on housing security for families in crisis. I'd like you and Mom to consider running it. Dad stared at me. Randolph, I don't know anything about running a foundation. You know construction. You know this community. And you've learned some hard lessons about what really matters, I pointed out. The foundation needs practical people who understand both the technical aspects of housing and the human impact of instability. I could see him processing the idea, weighing his capabilities against this new challenge. It would give you and Mom a fresh purpose, I continued, and a stable income while you rebuild your retirement savings. You don't owe us this, he said quietly. It's not about owing, I replied. It's about recognizing value. You and Mom have knowledge and experience that could benefit a lot of families. Why waste that? Before he could respond, my phone rang. It was Sarah Chen from Urban Development Partners. Randolph, great news, she said when I answered. The Detroit project is officially greenlit. The City Council approved our proposal unanimously. We need to move quickly on the first phase. That's fantastic, I replied. I'll call the team together this afternoon to start planning. After ending the call, I turned back to Dad, unable to contain my excitement. The Detroit revitalization project I told you about? It's happening. 50 blocks of abandoned properties will be transformed using our methods. Dad's smile was genuine. I'm proud of you, son. Really proud. The words I'd waited a lifetime to hear. They should have felt more triumphant, but instead, they felt like the natural conclusion to a long, difficult journey. Not an endpoint, but a new beginning. About the foundation, Dad said after a moment. Let me talk to your mother. I think she might like the idea of helping families stay in their homes. We walked toward the parking lot, discussing the practical aspects of setting up the foundation, when we spotted a familiar figure waiting by my car. Jake. He straightened when he saw us, nervously adjusting his safety vest. He'd come directly from the training site, and dust covered his work boots. I didn't know you'd be here, Dad, he said awkwardly. I was just dropping off the revised drawings for the community space. He held out a tube of blueprints. I took them, noticing the careful attention to detail that had been missing from his previous work. Thanks. How's the training going? Good. Jake nodded. Better than I expected. It's different. Building things that are meant to last. The three of us stood there, Miller men at a crossroads. So much had changed in such a short time. The father who had pushed us toward a flawed version of success was now humbled and open to new ideas. The brother who had taken shortcuts to impress others was learning the value of doing things right. And I, who had worked in isolation for so long, was discovering the strength that comes from bringing others into your vision. I was just telling Dad about the Detroit project, I said to break the silence. We'll need experienced site supervisors once the first phase is underway. Jake looked up sharply. Are you offering me a job? I'm suggesting a possibility, I clarified. Contingent on you completing the training program with high marks and demonstrating that you've really changed your approach to building. I have, he said earnestly. I'm done cutting corners. I've seen where that leads. Dad placed a hand on each of our shoulders. My sons, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Building something together. That's all I ever really wanted. It wasn't quite true. His vision had always been more specific and inflexible than that. But I appreciated the sentiment behind the words. He was trying to rewrite our family story just as we were trying to rebuild our relationships. One step at a time, I cautioned. We've all got a lot to prove to each other still. Jake nodded in agreement. Trust has to be earned back. I understand that. As we stood there, my phone buzzed with a text from Thomas Daniels. Breaking news. Sustainable Solutions, named one of 10 companies changing the future of housing by National Builder magazine. Congratulations. I showed the message to Dad and Jake. a mixture of pride and vindication washing over me. This was what I'd been working toward all along, not just personal success, but recognition that there was a better way to build, a more sustainable approach to creating homes and communities. "You know what we should do?" Dad suggested. "We should have a family dinner to celebrate. A fresh start." "I'd like that," I agreed. "But not at Mom's. She has enough on her plate with the move. Let's go out somewhere." "The Riverside Grill?" Jake suggested tentatively. Neutral territory. I thought about the last time we'd been there together. How different everything had been then. How none of us could have predicted the journey we were now on. "Riverside sounds perfect," I agreed. "Tomorrow night?" As we confirmed the details, I felt something I hadn't experienced with my family in years. Hope. Not the desperate hope of someone seeking approval, but the grounded hope of people committed to building something better than what came before. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust had been broken in multiple directions, and would take time to repair. Old patterns would resurface and need to be addressed. But the foundation was there now. The understanding that true success wasn't measured in profits or prestige, but in the integrity and durability of what you built, whether it was a building or a relationship. As Dad and Jake walked toward their cars, I received one final message of the day, this one from our newly hired community relations director. First residents moving back into their renovated units tomorrow. Press is interested in the story. Would you be available for interviews? I texted back my availability, then stood for a moment looking at the Northside Commons building. What had once been a symbol of corner-cutting and negligence was now a model of responsible, forward-thinking construction. The transformation mirrored what was happening in my family, proof that with the right approach, even damaged foundations could be strengthened and built upon. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, both for sustainable solutions and for the Miller family. But for perhaps the first time in my adult life, I felt ready to face those challenges not in isolation, but surrounded by people who finally understood what I'd been trying to build all along. 1 year later, I stood on a temporary stage erected in front of Sustainable Solutions' new headquarters, addressing a crowd of employees, partners, community members, and press. The autumn sun cast a golden light over the gathering, symbolic of the bright future we were building together. "Today marks not just the opening of this building," I said into the microphone, "but the culmination of a vision that many people told me was impossible. Sustainable, affordable housing built to the highest safety standards, created through methods that respect both our environment and the communities we serve." From my position on the stage, I could see my mother and father in the front row, both beaming with pride. Mom looked healthier than she had in years, energized by her work with the Miller Housing Security Foundation. Dad sat beside her, more relaxed in retirement than he'd ever been while running his company, finding new purpose in mentoring young builders through our training programs. Jake stood nearby with his wife Lucy, their relationship mended through couples counseling and Jake's genuine efforts to change. He now headed our Detroit operation, applying his natural charisma and leadership abilities within a framework of accountability and integrity that had been missing before. When I started this journey, I continued. I was working alone in a warehouse, driven by the belief that we could build differently, that we could create housing solutions that served people and planet, rather than just profit margins. Today, Sustainable Solutions employs over 100 people across 5 states, with projects that have provided safe, efficient housing for more than 2,000 families. The crowd applauded, and I felt a surge of gratitude for the team that had helped make this possible. Thomas Daniels and Sarah Chen sat in the second row, having become not just investors but true partners in expanding our vision. Our employees, many recruited from traditional construction backgrounds and retrained in sustainable methods, represented the changing face of the industry. "But the numbers don't tell the whole story," I said when the applause died down. "Behind every project is a community of people whose lives are improved by having a safe, stable place to call home. Behind every innovation is the commitment to proving that doing the right thing can also be the smart thing, the profitable thing, the lasting thing." I paused, making eye contact with my father. I learned from my father that building is about more than materials and methods. It's about creating something that stands the test of time. Where we differed was in how to achieve that durability. Through our journey, both personal and professional, we've come to understand that true sustainability requires both traditional wisdom and innovative thinking, both practical experience and fresh perspectives. Dad nodded slightly, acknowledging the reference. Our relationship had deepened over the past year, moving beyond the old dynamics of approval-seeking and disappointment to a genuine partnership based on mutual respect and complementary strengths. As we cut the ribbon on this new headquarters, built using the very technologies we've developed, I want to share the lesson that has guided sustainable solutions from the beginning, the lesson that has personal meaning for me and universal application for all of us. Build on a foundation of integrity, and what you create will withstand any storm. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone who knew our family story. The Miller family had weathered a significant storm, and though we'd lost some things in the process, what remained was stronger and more authentic than what had come before. After the ceremony, as guests toured the new facility, Dad pulled me aside. "That was quite a speech," he said, genuine admiration in his eyes. "Thanks, Dad. You know, when you left the family business, I thought you were making the biggest mistake of your life," he admitted. "I couldn't see beyond my own way of doing things. We were both stubborn," I acknowledged. "And we both had something to learn from each other." He nodded thoughtfully. "Your brother told me something interesting yesterday. He said working for you is harder than working for me ever was." I laughed. "Is that a complaint?" "No," Dad smiled. He meant it as a compliment. He said you demand excellence without compromise, but you also provide all the tools and support to achieve it. That's leadership. Son, coming from my father, this was the highest praise imaginable. The man who had once dismissed my vision as impractical idealism now recognized the strength in my approach. "The Foundation's annual report came in," he added, changing the subject. "Your mother's been going over the numbers. We've helped 60 families stay in their homes this year through the Emergency Assistance Program." Pride swelled in my chest. The Miller Housing Security Foundation had been one of my best ideas, not just for giving my parents meaningful work after their financial setback, but for creating a lasting impact in communities struggling with housing instability. "That's fantastic," I replied. "I knew you and Mom would make it successful." Dad's expression grew serious. "You gave us a second chance, Randolph. Not many would have done that after everything that happened." I thought carefully about my response. I believed in building something that lasts. That includes family. Our conversation was interrupted by Sarah Chen, approaching with an excited expression. "Randolph, the mayor of Chicago is here. He wants to discuss implementing our model for their affordable housing crisis." As I excused myself to meet with the mayor, I caught sight of Jake across the room, confidently explaining our construction system to a group of interested developers. The change in him over the past year had been remarkable. With the pressure to be the flashy, successful son removed, he'd discovered his own authentic strengths, particularly in translating complex technical concepts into language that resonated with non-technical people. The afternoon flowed by in a series of conversations, connections, and commitments to future projects. By the time the event wound down, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the sustainable landscaping that surrounded our new headquarters. My family gathered near the entrance, waiting for me to finish a final interview with a reporter from Architectural Digest. When I joined them, Mom wrapped me in a warm hug. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "Not just for this," she gestured at the building, "but for who you've become." "Thanks, Mom," I replied, emotion tightening my throat. "We're heading to Riverside for dinner," Jake said. "The whole family. You're joining us, right?" The Riverside Grill had become our place for family celebrations, a neutral territory where we could come together as equals, each contributing something valuable to the family dynamic. "Wouldn't miss it," I assured him. As we walked toward the parking lot, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The journey had been difficult, marked by betrayal, misunderstanding, and painful revelations. But through it all, I'd remained true to my vision, refusing to compromise on what I knew was right. And now, that integrity had yielded returns beyond anything I could have imagined. Not just professional success and recognition, but the healing of relationships I'd once thought permanently damaged. At dinner that evening, surrounded by family who finally saw and valued me for who I truly was, I reflected on how far we'd all come. Dad, once rigid in his definition of success, now championed innovation and sustainability. Mom, once a silent supporter in the background, now confidently led a foundation, making real difference in people's lives. Jake, once willing to take dangerous shortcuts for quick wins, now took pride in building things properly. And me? I'd learned that standing firm in your values doesn't have to mean standing alone. That building bridges is as important as building walls. That true success includes bringing others along on the journey. As our family raised glasses in a toast to the future, I realized that the most sustainable thing I'd built wasn't a housing system or a company or even a foundation. It was the web of relationships, strengthened through challenge and reforged with newfound respect, that would continue to support and inspire all of us through whatever lay ahead. Some foundations can be repaired, even after severe damage. Some relationships can be rebuilt, even after betrayal. Some lessons can only be learned through difficult journeys. But with patience, persistence, and principled action, what emerges can be stronger and more valuable than what existed before. That was the most important lesson of all, the one I carried with me as I looked around the table at my imperfect, resilient, evolving family. We were all works in progress, just like the communities we were helping to build, and the beauty was in the ongoing process of becoming better together. Have you ever had to stand your ground against family pressure to follow your own path? How did you handle it? And what was the outcome? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that staying true to your values is worth it in the end, even when it's difficult. Thank you for listening, and may you always build on foundations of integrity in your own life.